greens and beans because so many of the food storage programs are built around those items. And I want to emphasize it's important to have a variety of both because of just nutritional value. Each one has something to offer. And by combining grains and beans, you can work them together to get complete proteins. It's 3 parts grain, 1 part beans. So you'll hear me refer to that too. Some companies that you'll purchase long-term storage from will offer just maybe only 1 grain, like wheat. There's another one I'm aware of that only offers millet. And I think both those have limitations, and I'll explain that to you as we go along too. Another thing I would advise you about is be aware of the latest and greatest. There will always be, depending on who's marketing what, a new grain that is said to be the best of all, or a new product, whatever that is. And one of the most common ones we've heard of recently is quinoa. Quinoa is a very nutritious grain, but it does have some limitations. I'll be explaining those to you also. Whenever a new food is being marketed, you only hear selling parts. And I think one thing that sets us apart at Prepare the Way is we really try to give you the full picture so that when you are purchasing food for long-term storage, you're being a wise consumer and that you know how to use what you've purchased. Each thing has some advantages and disadvantages. Wheat is the most common thing stored, and wheat is the most versatile. But definitely those with gluten intolerance can't work with wheat, so they need options. So there is no one size fits all. Variety is important, and quality foods are important. Okay, so let's look at some of the things that you'll find and that you'll hear about. I've put together kind of what I call a short course on grains that is a review of all the different grains that we offer or that you'll find in other companies that offer grains for storage. I'm going to highlight some of them, and a couple of them I'll develop a little more fully, and hopefully you'll become aware with some things that will guide you in your purchasing. Now remember, whole grains have longer storage life. So when we talk about storage grains, like with wheat, it's wheat berries. It's not the cracked wheat, it's not wheat flour, it's wheat berries. Flour doesn't store as well. White flour you can store quite a while, I don't know, a year or two perhaps. Whole wheat flour does not. You lose nutritional value, and because of the bran is still there, the whole wheat flour gets rancid. There's still that fat part intact, and a lot of nutrition is in there, but it will become rancid more quickly. So whole wheat flour that has been freshly ground needs to be used or frozen. And some other terminology, you'll hear some grains have a husk on them that is removed. Sometimes it's hard to remove, sometimes it is not, but you'll hear that reference. And then sometimes you'll hear the word oat groats, G-R-O-A-T. That's an oat grain where the husk has been removed, but it could also be any hulled grain that has large pieces. So sometimes these words are used interchangeably. Don't let that throw you. Okay, some types of grains you'll hear about, just alphabetically. One of the new ones that's getting a lot of publicity is amaranth. And amaranth is a nutritious thing to plant. It's one of those things that you could almost say is a sustainable type gardening because it will reseed and come back and reseed and come back, almost to the point of being invasive. You can use the little grains, the little seeds, for a grain. However, having grown it, it would be work, definitely. It's something that it wouldn't be practical unless you really had need for it. But of course, you can purchase the grain already. And with the amaranth plant, you can also use the leaves. Another one that you'll hear of is barley. You can buy barley with whole barley, hulled barley, which has the outer husk removed, and the barley husk is hard to get off. So what you would get would be hulled barley or pearled barley. And I have some sample grains that as I talk about them, I want to show you kind of what they are. This is a pearled barley, and it almost looks like a wheat kernel. It's had that outer husk removed. You can also buy a barley flake, which is like this run through a flaker, and it looks like kind of a thick oatmeal flake. But barley has a sweet, nutty taste. It's high in fiber. It's really a good product that's good for you. Most often you'll see it like cooked in soups or stews. It's really good with mushrooms if you have mushrooms available. barley stores a long time. It makes a good breakfast cereal too. Now it's low gluten. It does have gluten, but it's low gluten, so it won't isn't something you can make a raised bread out of. But good for cereal, good for stir-in, for soups. Most often you find it for storage in the pearled barley form, which isn't as nutritious as the whole barley, but it's one of those things you have to deal with for long-term storage sometimes. Another thing you might find is a buckwheat. Buckwheat's not a true cereal. The seeds have this really hard, fibrous hull that you have to have a buckwheat huller to remove it. Where you may have heard of it as like buckwheat pancakes. It's a taste you either like or you don't. So I wouldn't buy a large quantity of it unless you've tried it first. And I don't have a sample of that one here for you. Corn is something else I don't have a sample of, but corn you're pretty familiar with. You'll find two different kinds at least in the Prepare the Way store. There's the super sweet corn, and then there's more of like a field corn or a regular dried corn, which isn't quite so sweet. Another thing that you might like is popcorn. Popcorn can be ground, but definitely the popcorn is just a wonderful comfort food too. Then if you've ever heard of hominy, hominy is a field corn that has been soaked, pre-cooked, dehulled, and then canned. It is a long process. A lot of the nutrition is actually missing. It's yummy, but there isn't a lot of nutritional value. And grits then are ground hominy. So you'll see those sometimes available for purchase. Now corn, there are other grains that actually offer more nutritional value than corn. But the thing about corn is it's convenient and it can be grown so many places. When I'm looking at grains and beans, one thing I'm looking for are things that we can grow locally, things that we can grow locally, like as an individual I can plant and grow, and things that are versatile as far as their use. If you can plant them or if they are grown locally, they're going to be more reasonable cost. And that's the advantage with corn. It's more reasonable to grow and work with because it is grown locally. Another really nutritious thing that you might consider in storage is flax. These are the whole flax seeds. Ground flax is something that you'll see many times. And I would tell you, if you're grinding the flax, don't do it in your grinder. Do it like in a coffee grinder because the seeds have oil in them and they'll clog up a regular grinder. It can be brown flax, which is what this is. It can be a golden flax. It's one of the best sources of omega-3 fatty acids for reducing cholesterol. They also are high in soluble fiber, which is good for reducing cholesterol. Really nutritious additive. Now this is the kind of thing you would never buy a bucket of these. You might buy a smaller can or you might buy a number 10 can. We use it as stir-ins, like in bread, in oatmeal, that kind of thing. So we buy it ground, keep it in the freezer now while we can, and then stir it in. But that's the flax seeds. Another thing you might hear is kamut, K-A-M-U-T. That's an ancient variety of wheat. Now millet. Millet is one of those things that we've been hearing a lot about lately. Actually, one company that I'm aware of, their only grain recommendation for storage is millet. And when I first heard that, I thought, really? So I started doing some looking about it. And I actually, on that and quinoa, I've done a little more research and I have them both here. This one is the millet, and they look very similar. And the quinoa is a little smaller seed, but they are very different in nutritional value and how they cook, but they do have a real similar look to them. But both of those have just been hot items lately, and I thought, if people aren't as familiar with those, maybe it would help to do a little research on them both. So let me tell you first about the millet. It originated in China. Now, you think about rice in China, but rice was southern China. Millet was more the northern China. It's been used extensively throughout Asia and Europe. Most often in like flatbreads, porridge, again, kind of a cereal type item. In China, it's often eaten with beans, sweet potatoes, or squash. In northern India, it's used to make a type of flatbread. In Germany, it's eaten with honey and apples. And then the Greeks and Italians fermented the grain and made it into bread. Here in the United States, this is kind of funny, You almost always find it in bird feed or animal feed. But when you buy the mixed bird feeds, if you feed your birds in the winter, that's where we most often see millet. So it's kind of interesting how these things come around and people realize, hey, that there's really nutritional quality to that and we should be taking advantage of it. Now this is the good stuff. It stores well. It stores exceptionally well. Another thing is that people with celiac disease can tolerate it. However, if you have thyroid disease, you would not want to eat millet. It is rich in B vitamins. There's no gluten, so if you're gluten intolerant, it's good for you. It has good source of calcium, iron, potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, and zinc. It's promoted as being the least allergenic grain. And it can be used in place of like a rice or quinoa with foods served on top, like vegetables or meat on top. Protein content is about the same as wheat. So lots of good things. It lacks some versatility as you would compare it to wheat. And then the thing with the thyroid disease could cause a problem. But other than that, it's highly digestible by people who have trouble with other greens. And it's inexpensive, and it can be grown in the U.S. So keep that in mind. All right, then we have the quinoa. And you know what? They look so similar that I dropped my little handful of millet on top of the quinoa and couldn't hardly even tell. But it's a smaller, and you know, quinoa isn't actually a true grain. It's not like the others. It is most closely related, now this is interesting, to beets, spinach, and tumbleweeds. It's originated in the Andes of South America. It was a staple for the Inca people. And then in the 1980s, production began in the United States. Now, quinoa in the United States, where they have found the most success, is in Colorado. It requires a certain climate. It was tried in Minnesota, not as successfully. As far as I know, it is not grown in the Midwest. And the reason being, it requires that its ripening time has to be very dry. It likes a cooler climate. And in fact, it was interesting that the quinoa grown in the United States does not have the high nutritional content as that which is grown in the Andes. Because that's one of the things where you hear about it. It's just high in protein, high in nutrition, and you could almost live exclusively off quinoa. Well, not really. It has advantages. It's a nutty, wonderful flavor, and it does have high protein content, but it's not the end-all as far as grains. And the thing about not being able to grow it locally, I find is a major disadvantage. I store some of it, I like it, but I want things that I can access. Now, one real disadvantage with quinoa, any moisture it sprouts. So like during harvest time, if say we had a long hot or a long dry summer and we grew it here, but it got damp during harvest season, it would even sprout at that point. So the quality of the grain would not be as good. So it does really require a specific growth climate. I mean, it's just picky about where it's grown. High protein content. It has a balanced set of essential amino acids for humans, so it's a complete protein source. And that's the key thing that makes it so valuable. It is gluten-free, which again is important. However, and you know, here's all these howevers. Remember, it's in the beet, spinach family. It's high in oxalates. If you are one who is prone to kidney stones, it's high in oxalates and you would not want to eat very much of it. In its natural state, it's coated with saponins, and that's a bitter coating that has to be removed. Now that keeps birds from bothering it when it's growing, but if I were just to cook this without rinsing it, it would be bitter. You have to rinse those off, and there's this process you go through. And then, now, it is sold, again, by some of the grain companies that say, lump it in with wheat, and they say everything lasts up to 20 years. But if you check with the cooking sites that talk about cooking quinoa, they say 3 to 6 months in the refrigerator, which would make it more comparable to brown rice. So I would be wary of purchasing large quantities of it for storage. And again, my information for that statement that said that the quinoa grown in the United States doesn't have quite the same nutritional value as that grown other places is from it's an alternative crops field guide. It's one of those university productions. So it's not like someone else is coming against them has a different grain they're promoting. It's actually one of the ag guides that is what they were trying to promote the growth of it in the United States, and it's from the University of Minnesota. Okay, so let's look at some of the others. I've talked a lot about millet and quinoa. One of the common local grains, again, in this area is oats. And I don't have any whole oat groats here, but I have sample of steel cut oats, which is the oat groat that's been chunked up. And then I have rolled oats, which is and you can get a flaker. You can purchase one of those and crush like the oat groat and make fresh oatmeal, which is fabulous. But the difference between like the rolled oat and the quick oat and the instant oat that you might find is the size of the flakes. So a rolled oat has a thicker flake, and as you get down to the instant, there's less. And as the flake is smaller, you don't get as much fiber, but some of that depends on your preference too. The steel cut is considered to be the most nutritious, followed by the rolled oat, followed by the quick cooking oats. And I will tell you, if you're one that likes the little idea of the instant oatmeal mixes, they're an easy thing to make for yourself. You can do that with really rolled oats or quick cook oats, either one, and stir in your whatever you like to season it with, and add boiling water. Do it in the thermos like I've suggested for other things, and you can have your own instant oatmeal, or at least quickly cooked oatmeal. Let's see, I talked about quinoa. Rice. I have brown rice here and I have white rice. And there's really, you're very familiar with rice, so there's not a lot to say about that, except that white rice has had the husk and the bran and the germ removed, so it cooks more rapidly. It's not as nutritious, but it stores longer. And then you may have heard about wild rice. Wild rice is a whole different thing. It's a grass. So where your true rices are, you're going to find there are different varieties of white rices and brown rice. On the website we have brown, white, basmati, parboiled. When you start getting into the instant rices, again, those cook more quickly, and some of the companies offer those for their storage products. They don't last as long. You do have rapid cooking, but you're giving up some nutrition. And then rye berries. Rye is a tasty alternative in cereals, and you can do, the berries look much like wheat berries. They're a darker color, but you can do cracked rye. You can do rye flakes. There is like a 7-grain flake cereal mix that has wheat flakes, rye flakes, oatmeal flakes in it. It's a tasty thing to consider too. Then you might hear spelt is another one, S-P-E-L-T. Spelt is a species of wheat, and we've been hearing a lot about it in the United States over the last few years. It does have gluten in it, but sometimes people that are a little, maybe that can handle a little gluten, don't seem to have as much problem with it as they do wheat. So again, that's something you would have to check out on your own, but it is a variety of wheat. And then there's a triticale, which is T-R-I-T-I-C-A-L-E. That is a hybrid of wheat and rye. So that's a storage grain also. And then of course wheat, it's the most versatile and widespread grain. I have samples here of, I think I just did the white wheat, because the red wheat is just simply a darker color. And then I have bulgur, which is made from red wheat. So let me explain the differences in them. The white wheat is a milder taste, and it is kind of a newer wheat, but very, very popular. It's really my preferred one. And it is a lighter color kernel, same nutritional value, that's not an issue, but it has a milder taste. So if you have someone in your home that's just sure they don't like whole wheat bread, this is a good way to get them started. Now, with I will tell you something, if you're cooking with wheat, and speaking of bread, if you're doing the loaf breads, when you're grinding them, If you are using one of the hand grinders, you cannot get as fine of a flour. The finer flour makes a lighter loaf of bread, so it's more like store-bought bread, if that's what your family prefers. So that would be a time to pull out the sifter again. Run that flour. Now you can do it different ways. You can grind it and then grind it a second time and a third time even to get it finer. But then if you still want it finer than that, put it in the sifter, crank it through. What comes out will be fine bread flour, and then what's left you could use for cooked cereal. That's a really helpful thing to know. The bulgur is one of my favorite products. Now let me go back up a minute. You'll also find a product called cracked wheat, which is just simply wheat kernel cracked. And that's used most often like for cereals, for cooked cereals, things like that. Now I have in my hand bulgur, B-U-L-G-U-R. It has other spellings, but that's a common spelling. And if you were to examine it, it looks like cracked wheat. This is the difference. It has been pre-cooked or like steamed, then dried and cracked. So it's kind of like a convenience product. Instead of just taking the wheat kernel and cracking it, it has been steamed, then dried, then cracked. You can purchase it like this, and there are several grades depending on the coarseness. You can also make your own, and I've done both. So if it's a product you like, it's a very simple thing to make on your own too. I really like it. To me, it's like a convenience food made from grains. You can, it does not have to be cooked. In my little cookbook, I featured several recipes using bulgur. One of them, a friend of ours came up with just on his own. Sometimes necessity, you just come up with the most inventive things, and he was thinking, okay, I've got this stuff, how am I going to use it? And came up with a great breakfast or snack recipe. We call it Frank's Bulgur Mix, but he did the bulgur and he reconstituted it overnight, like in, I think he used milk with it, put it in the fridge, and then he stirred in peanut butter, honey, raisins, and slivered almonds. Delicious. And it could be eaten cold, it could be eaten warm, but you've got protein in that. You can do this. It's used from basically storable foods, highly nutritious, and by altering the products a little bit, it's something children would enjoy also. Bulgur is also what's used in tabbouleh. Many people are familiar with that Middle Eastern type dish. So another recommended product, I like to use it. You will also see things like on our website we have an Ezekiel mix, like a 6-grain blend, a 7-grain blend, a 9-grain blend. What these are, Ezekiel mix is taken from that scripture reference to Ezekiel when he was told to take these certain grains and beans and mix them together to make sort of a bread. And it's a mix biblically. It's wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. Now, you can buy mixes. I'm not sure they're all quite the same things. I have a recipe that has wheat, rye, barley, millet, lentils, great northern beans, red kidney beans, and pinto beans that are ground together to make an Ezekiel flour. So you can see by having some basic storage things, you can do a lot of different things with them. The blends, like the 6-grain blend is like red wheat, white wheat, rye, oats, barley, sunflower seeds. 7-grain has red wheat, white wheat, barley, brown rice, triticale, rye, and millet. So the blends have an assortment of different grains. Those are nice like for breads, like you might make a 9-grain bread or a 7-grain bread, or for cereals, that kind of thing. But they would never take the place of having some individual grains stored. All right, now I want to try to help expand your thinking on what you can do with some of these things. One of my most recent discoveries was oat milk. I need to find it here. I made, and I hope you can see it. It really looks like milk. I had read about this, I thought, that is just bizarre. But it really worked, and it's not a bad product. It is like, in it, you have a blender, and you put like a cup of oats in it, rolled oats, and then probably 3 cups of water, blended it thoroughly, like, you know, on high for a minute. And then I poured it through my trusty strainer, and I came out with a kind of a real milky, it looks like a powdered milk product. And you could use this on cereal. You can use it. The source I was using said they made an iced coffee with it. They used 2 cups of this with, I think it was a cup of frozen coffee and then a little ice in a blender for a refreshing summer drink. But it really could be used as a milk substitute. So for people who have allergies or things with dairy products who might be using an almond milk for something, or a soy milk, oat milk is another thing you might not have thought about. Okay, now let's look at the other part of this protein combination. I said 3 parts grain, 1 part bean. And if you think about third world countries, basic cooking methods, lots and lots of places will do that. Beans and rice, cornbread and chili, tortillas and beans, all of those are natural combinations of that grain and bean that forms that complete protein. So when you're thinking of long-term storage foods, it's a great way to do it. And if you're just on a budget, you can really come up with some nutritious meals using the variety of beans and grains. I have several featured here. In the 1-year plan, I know the bucket is pintos, because pintos are so versatile. I mean, everything from chili to bean dips to refried beans, all those sorts of things are used from pinto beans. And then some of the others that are in that variety mix, this is a navy bean. It is a white small bean. Actually, this is my least favorite, but I'll tell you why it's important in a minute. I'll go through these first and come back to that one. And then black beans, totally different than a pinto bean. And to me, for someone to say they don't like beans, it's like saying, well, I don't like any vegetables, including potatoes, because there's such huge variety available. Differences in taste, differences in the way they cook. Then this one is a lentil. Lentils are the undiscovered nutritional giant. I mean, they cook quickly, they don't use much fuel, they're easy to sprout, they're versatile to use in so many ways. I often hear people talk about an 11-grain mix or 9-grain mix. They like that mix for their beans. This is a sample of it, one that I bought, and I made the big mistake several years ago of getting a 5-gallon bucket of this. And I just can't hardly wade through it. And I'll tell you why. You have the great variety of nutrition, but if when you cook this together, lentils cook in almost no time. Black beans cook rather quickly. But to get all the beans done, some of them are like mush. So keep that in mind. This is a more expensive thing to purchase. Like if you're buying beans, it's cheaper to buy each of these individually and choose the ones you want to mix together. And actually, I would recommend you do it that way, because then you lose some versatility when it's pre-mixed. These are garbanzo beans. These are what you would make hummus from. Again, a very different bean than like a black bean or a navy bean. On the website, there are a bunch of other different ones. I mean, there's so much variety in beans. I wrote down a few of them. There are mixes. There's an Azuki bean, Anasazi bean, baby limas, black turtles, garbanzos, Great Northerns, kidney, lentils, lima, mung bean, small white navy, pink bean, pinto bean, red bean, soybean, black-eyed peas, split peas, and yellow split peas, to name a few. So we have tons on the website that are available to you. Now I want to show you something just to help you think about how you would use them, because we get locked into this, how beans and rice, or maybe a bean soup, but beans are extremely versatile. So picture with me, you've purchased your beans. Maybe you got them in a can or a bucket, or maybe you bought this 10-pound bag of pintos because you really wanted to be prepared. Have you thought about what you would do with them? If I was right here in the room with you, I'd do it as a test. But I find that, again, people get stuck with this, with ham and beans, chili, beans and rice. But let me suggest to you that you could also mash them and use them in burritos. And we're talking just with pinto beans, you can do all these things. Baked beans, bean flour, sprouts, of course beans and rice, bean burgers. You can add them to soups or salads. You can make a dip like a black bean and corn salsa. You could do hummus with garbanzo beans. Refried beans could be served like as a side dish with eggs. Ezekiel bread has beans in it. All of those are bean dishes that you could do with this bag. And as far as versatility, this bag of beans, I think I wrote it down, how much, they were like 58 cents a pound. So very reasonably priced, right? This 10-pound bag was 58 cents a pound. If you buy them by the pound, sometimes it's $1 up to $1.49. It depends a little on the kind of bean that you're buying. But as far as inexpensive, high nutrition, I'm sold on that as an option. I want to show you some of just the different possibilities that you can do with this too. One thing you can do is home canning with the beans. These are some. Beans will get kind of stale after 7 or 8 or 9 years, depending on how you've stored them. So let's say you've stored some beans like that. That's my quarrel with these little navy beans. They take a long time to cook, and I had trouble getting them tender. So what I did was I home canned some. Now I followed extension regulations, and it takes a long time for them to process, but there's hardly any preparation involved. And then it's a great convenience food. So what I do is in the winter, I do these, like in January on snowy days, and then we have them the rest of the year to use in soups. Another thing you can do with beans is this is a bean dip, very similar to hummus, and it is made just with a white bean. Now I cheated with this. I didn't have time to cook them ahead, so I had 2 cans of the canned beans, white beans. I rinsed them and blended them up with some garlic, olive oil, basil, and thyme. Now the garlic, basil, and thyme were from my garden, and olive oil, and I have a bean dip. High in nutrition, and it shows how versatile beans are. And you could use it with corn chips, you could dip vegetables with it. Lots of uses. Now I mentioned earlier too, we need to get away from the thinking of I have to have yeast bread, sandwich type bread that I'm so used to. Because if you are in a situation where it's an emergency and you don't have all the fuel cooking choices, like maybe your oven is an electric oven that you could not bake in like in a traditional way. Some of the flatbreads have a lot more versatility. You can do them on a grill, you can do them in a skillet, you can do them on a cast iron skillet or a griddle over a campfire. And just to show you samples, there's a flatbread. Flatbread would be good with the bean dip too. Flatbread would also be good with refried beans. And you can make an instant refried bean dip by grinding the beans and then just cooking it a little bit. And I actually have some recipes for those type things in my little cookbook too. Tortillas. You know, so much of the world uses that kind of thing on a regular basis. And we are just now, it seems like, looking at some of those options. And when you start looking for bread in storage, you see a lot more flatbreads because they are so versatile. Now this is one of my trials. This I put out here. This is a sprouted bread. And I want to read. It came with my little sprout lids. And I thought, you know, I need to try that. And this is a lesson in why you always try things when you have plenty of things available before you really want to eat them. It had yummy stuff in it. It has rye, powdered milk, sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, chopped rye or wheat sprouts, and then a little oil and an egg. And then we cooked it on a grill, like on a pizza stone on a grill. Sounded yummy. Well, it's not so great. If you had a hot soup to dip it in, it might be all right. But we were not very pleased with it. Packed with nutrition. If I was hungry, I would eat it. But it's probably not something a family with young children would enjoy. Which brings that point up. Try the foods. Test things ahead of time. Work nutrition into it. I'm all about nutritionally dense foods. But they need to be nutritionally dense foods that your family will eat. And you don't want to waste ingredients when ingredients are limited. Another thing I want to show you with the bean flour. Actually, let me move this aside for a minute so you can see more clearly. I mentioned the white beans were my least favorite. One of the reasons for that is they take a long time to cook, and they just don't have quite the same flavor as like the pinto or a black bean. But the reason I like them is bean flour is also a great thing to add protein to bread. You can use it as a stir-in. You can use it like in cream soups for a thickener, and again to add protein. But this, and so like if you have a bean that maybe is a little old, you can grind it. Now remember I said a hand grinder, and I have a good one. I have a Country Living grain mill, which is, you know, one of the best for a hand grinder. But you can see that there's big variety in here. We have the little fine pieces, and we have some larger pieces of bean flour that would be much more noticeable if I was trying to use them in a bread. So once again, I'm going back to the sifter. I have really, for a woman who didn't use a sifter for 10 or 15 years of her life, I'm back to using one a lot. And if I sift this flour, I get a nice smooth product. And then whatever is left in the top, I can either use for something else. If I was putting it in a soup where it had time to cook, I would go ahead and use it. But I could use the finer flour as a stir-in on some bread or pancakes maybe, or something, a way to get nutrition for children that's not recognizable. Another thing with the beans is, if your beans have gotten a little old, is cracked beans. When you're buying like, say you're buying a chili mix or something like that and you dump it out, you'll find that a lot of the beans in it are cracked. The reason is it lessens the cooking time. So if this is something that you are wanting to lessen your cooking time on, you could do that ahead of time. Crack those beans, and then if they're a little bit old and stale, it wouldn't matter so much either. The other thing about beans that I like so much is because we can grow them in Midwest gardens. In fact, most places in the country can grow them. So when I was talking about items that would be easy to locate, locally grown, less expensive, more versatile, more sustainable, beans would be a wise move for that. I just went through my gardening catalog and listened to some of these great beans that you could actually plant. Bumblebee, cannellini, topaz, brown Dutch, Jacob's cattle, Vermont Appaloosa, soldier beans, calypso beans, bird egg beans, money beans. They're all colors, they're beautiful. And you know the thing about beans, if you're growing them for dried beans in the garden, because our minds think green beans, these are grown and the shells dry, and then you shell them out, okay? And then you have to go through a process and get them cleaned so that you get all the little extra pieces out, and it's just the bean left, which is kind of a hassle, to tell the truth. We tried it in our garden, and I thought at that time, it's a lot of work and it's a busy time of year and I'm not sure I'm going to do that again. But you know what, if I needed them, I would certainly do it again. And the beauty of it, beans are not hybrid. They are non-hybrid. Many of them are heirloom, which means they're self-pollinating. So you could plant, say you had a Jacob's cattle bean. You could plant it, grow it, save those beans, and save your seed from it year after year. So there's a lot of potential in that too. So again, I recommend lots of variety in beans. I recommend lots of variety in grains. Experiment with them. They are an inexpensive, good choice of nutrition. And really, they form the foundation of most food storage plans.